Hi, I'm Cavin Elizabeth, an international wedding photographer based in San Diego, and today I'm going to be talking to you about which vendors need to be tipped for your wedding. Now, I will start off by saying that it is your wedding. You don't have to tip anybody unless it's required by contract, which sometimes catering staff does require that, but you don't have to tip anybody. So I know there's a lot of people out there who get really frustrated by tips. You don't have to do whatever you don't want to do unless it is required in your contract. But if you are somebody who is just wanting to know what the etiquette is or who you should be tipping, who is really customary to tip and who is just kind of like if they did a great job and you want to tip them, I'm going to be talking about all of those things today. So I pulled my research from probably about 4 or 5 different large blogs, and I kind of like read through to see, okay, this vendor they keep repeating needs to be tipped. This vendor I keep seeing just could be a maybe tipped if you love them. So I broke it into the categories based on how many times I saw a certain category of vendor being mentioned in regards to whether or not they should be tipped or whether or not they have to be tipped. So that's what I'm going to go through today for you guys. I'm going to start with the category of vendors that are pretty much always tipped. This is a category that is very, very standard to receive tips. So I will let you know who those guys are. So hair and makeup, that's a very popular one. Now, if it is the owner of the business, typically you don't have to tip hair and makeup, but hair and makeup is very customarily tipped because it is usually team members and not always the owner working on the bridal party. Another one is catering. So with catering, you do need to check and see if gratuity is already included in your contract. If it is, you do not have to worry about it, but it is pretty customary for the wait staff and other members of the catering team to be tipped. Now, the next category is delivery and setup staff. So if you have a rental company and there are people moving the chairs or the tables out of the van onto your wedding area, then that is somebody who usually would be tipped. Typically, they're not the owners of the business. They are doing delivery and setup for the wedding. So that's a vendor that you really might want to consider tipping. Now, another one is transportation. So if you've hired shuttles to drive you and your guests or you and your bridal party from place to place, that is another person that is very usually tipped at most weddings. There is another category where it is basically tip if you really want to. So photography, for example, is included in this. I never expect tips from my couples, but I would say these days I probably have about 80-85% of my couples giving me tips, which is very, very generous and sweet of them and totally not all expected. Photography and videography usually fall into that category. And then we have your wedding planner. So wedding planners sometimes get tips, sometimes don't. If you feel like they went above and beyond and you are open to the idea of tipping them, then that's great, but you don't have to. And then officiants, a lot of officiants will sometimes get tipped. I know for church officiants, so pastors, priests, whatever it may be, often they will not accept tips, but they will accept donations to their church. So just something to keep in mind if you have a religious affiliated officiant. The band, the DJ, those are people who also sometimes get tipped, but not always. Now, there are cases with bands where you might see them getting tipped more if they're not the owners of the band. That's just something you're going to have to decide is up to you. But I did not consistently find that bands and DJs were always tipped. Some places said that bands were always tipped, but some places said that you could kind of go either way. So that's just going to be up to you and how much you're enjoying their music that night. And then the last two are your florist and then your cake artist. Those are people who are sometimes tipped, but again, not always. And then kind of the last category that I had researched and put together were the categories that were basically never tipped. Either these people were not mentioned in any of the resources I found, or they were explicitly stated as somebody who just doesn't really receive tips. And one of those was rental companies. So if you're getting your linens or your tabletop settings from a rental company and you're ordering them, you would typically not tip them. Now, you might tip their delivery and setup staff if you or someone that you know is not doing it yourselves. So that's just something to keep in mind. Another thing is the gown boutique. People typically do not tip the place where they got their dress or the designer of their dress. I don't know that people are tipping their alterations person either. If you really thought you were so happy with them and they really did a great job, you could tip them if you want. But again, this was a category that was pretty much never mentioned anywhere. If you feel kind of against tips, or maybe you just don't have any money left to spend on tips, that's totally okay. If you can at least try to get the categories that are most always tipped, that's great. If you don't have leftover room for the other categories, That's totally okay. A lot of these people are not expecting tips whatsoever. It's just a really nice surprise when they get them, but you should not feel obligated to do it if you do not feel like doing it. So if you want to show your appreciation, but you don't want to or cannot do it in the form of a monetary tip, then some of the things that you can do that are very, very helpful for your vendors is one, write them a review. I cannot tell you how hard it is to get reviews from couples. Even if I'll have couples, which I have every single couple, emailing me after the wedding to say how happy they are. They're just like overwhelmed with how beautiful the photos are and how much they love the experience. Sometimes people just will not write reviews. So I find that it is very valuable to me to have reviews for my business. And if any couple is willing to leave me one, then that is fantastic, because sometimes people just never get around to it, or they just don't like writing, or whatever it may be. It can be very challenging to get reviews from brides, even if they're super, super happy with your work. So I will say leaving them a review online, somewhere like The Knot or Google or Yelp. You can even ask them where they would like reviews. That is very much appreciated and almost as good as a tip, I think, because it's so helpful for future couples to know that they can trust the work that that vendor is going to do. Another way that you can really show your appreciation for your vendors is to write them a thank you note. I get thank you notes from a lot of my couples these days, and it is so sweet. It really touches my heart, makes me feel really good. So I really find that a thank you note is just a very, very kind gesture. A lot of people don't take the time to do them anymore, but I think they're great. I try to write them for anybody who does something great for me. So that's another thing that you can do, and that costs like maybe $1 when you think about the supplies and the postage. So very easy to do. And then the last thing that you can do to really show your appreciation for your vendors is refer them to your friends and family. So if you have a friend or family member that is engaged, or even a coworker, you can definitely say, hey, like, I had a great team of vendors. Let me know if you'd like referrals, or my photographer was amazing. I think she'd be a really great fit for you, something like that. So if you are sending your vendors business, they're going to really appreciate you for that. And that's just an amazing thing to do for them, for the vendors that you are really happy with. So anyways, I hope that that was helpful for you guys, knowing which categories are most commonly tipped, which categories are kind of like if you feel like it, and which categories you in no way need to tip whatsoever unless you just want to. And then also the alternative methods to tipping, which you could also do this in conjunction with tipping if you are open to tipping. But if you don't want to tip, then if you want to show some appreciation and love for your vendors, then leaving them a review, referring them to friends, and writing a thank you note is always very appreciated. Hope you guys have a great day. Bye!